We're back in the studio right here at Lagos Talks 91.3 FM. My guest is Wofai Samuel, the Director General of Nigerian-American Chamber of Commerce, and we're talking trade. All right, thank you for staying with us. Now, narrowing it down to the AGOA and the individual businesses. I was telling you off air, I have a friend who exports groundnut from Togo, and trying to get him groundnut from Nigeria, says it wouldn't be accepted. Now, let's say AGOA, for example. What are the challenges with AGOA? Because I know that Kenya maximizes it. Ghana does so well with AGOA. I mean, they export almost everything, and it's on their lips almost every day. But in Nigeria, first of all, before I jump into conclusion, how well have we fared with this? What has been the benefits, and are we getting the best out of it, and why, if not?
Okay, thank you very much. So your questions: what is how well have we fared? Are we getting the benefits?
Yeah.
If not a yes, why?
Why? Yeah.
First of all, the country I like to reference when I speak about AGOA is South Africa. So yes, Ghana has the potentials for Ghana has been enormous, and they've done really well with AGOA. I don't have the percentage, but for South Africa, I do think that I think about 50%. South Africa generated more than 50% revenue from non-oil exports, exporting to the U.S.
Oh.
Under AGOA.
Just U.S.?
Yes, exporting just to the U.S. under AGOA. So South Africa is one of the countries that has, to a reasonable extent, maximized AGOA to the best of its ability with respect to non-oil products, non-oil commodities, non-oil exports. Yeah. Now, for Nigeria has not maximized AGOA. So a lot of
traders...
how
poorly we've done.
Well, how poorly we do, I think on a scorecard of 100, I could give Nigeria a 45, not even a 50%. Whereas you're looking at countries like Ghana, you're giving them 75. You're looking at countries like Kenya. You're giving Kenya an 80. I'll give South Africa like a 98%. So now, the reasons are quite simple. So for Nigeria, first of all, not so many traders understand the context and the concept of AGOA, not so many businesses. So AGOA is strictly a US thing. And why we're so particular about AGOA is because Nigeria and the US, US happens to be our second largest trading partner. So excluding
AGOA is African Growth Opportunity Act.
Yes, Act from the US, put together by the US to ensure that goods that are exported from Africa to the US are on almost limited or zero tariff. So you're paying for tariffs, but it's really, really low. As long as your goods and services measure up to the standards that US expects and US wants, you're almost not paying for tariffs. So even if you have to pay, it's very low. Whereas if you're exporting to the US and you're exporting not under AGOA, you're paying really high tariffs. You're paying for all, you're paying for all the treaties, all the taxes. It's high comparable to exporting under AGOA. Now, not too many people understand the context of AGOA. It's because there are not many channels, avenues, opportunities to educate Nigerians about AGOA. So, for instance, the Nigerian-American Chamber of Commerce, we keep talking about AGOA. There are several other associations and organizations that are pro-Nigeria-American. They keep talking about AGOA. Again, I'd say not too many educational classes, not too many educational events, conversations tailored around AGOA. People are actually left to researching about AGOA, buying books that talk about AGOA, reading about AGOA, but not necessarily attending virtual sessions, online webinars, conversations that revolve about AGOA, where you can interact real time with Americans and people who have explored AGOA to ask questions and then see how it can benefit you. One of the other challenge I would say is that has made us not necessarily maximize AGOA to the best of our ability is, to a reasonable extent, we've always had problems with packaging and quality when it comes to exporting abroad. So yes, indeed, we do well in Nigeria because this intra-Nigeria, to a large extent, we're not very particular about the standards of what we consume because we just assume they're okay as long as they're okay. But in an international market, whether you're exporting to Ghana or even to Benin Republic or Kenya, they have their standards, their rules and regulations. There are certain standards and minimum required standards that you have to measure up with. If you don't measure up with these standards, there are no shortcuts. Your goods would be rejected, and if your goods are rejected, of course, that's a capital losses. It's a lot of loss on FX for Nigeria, incurring a lot of losses. So with respect to the content of the goods that are exported, the quality, sometimes we don't measure up. And then I think in that regard, I call on the Standards Organization of Nigeria, I call on NAFDAC, and so many other agencies that act as regulators to the goods and services that we produce. They need to do more. They are trying and doing their best, but a lot more has to be done. Now, with respect to packaging, we also need to understand that packaging, even in the US market, is very different. So what should the labeling and packaging look like? What are the colors they want? How should your words, your phrases, and whatever it is be crafted? Some of these things they look very minute, but to a reasonable extent, they are major for an international market like the US. Away from that, you also consider documentation. So for you to be able to maximize even some opportunities in MDAs in Nigeria, you know how cumbersome the process can be. It's cumbersome, but at the end of the day, it's productive, because you have to go through all of those documentation. So the documentations process can be very hectic and tasking, but the end result is worth the Herculean task.
All right.
So when you look at, the US, the process of documentations, a lot of Nigerian traders, Nigerian businesses and organizations are almost not willing to go through the phases of those documentation processes. So they begin, and at the end of the day, at some point in time, they just lay back. And then we cannot say that we do not have our own challenges in Nigeria. Electricity continues to be a huge challenge.
On that process, for example, is it because the demands are unrealistic, or why do Nigerians just give up halfway?
I don't think the demands are unrealistic, because if we say the demands are unrealistic, Ghana is doing it. I don't think
South Africa is doing it.
South Africa is actually even a larger economy. So let's even keep South Africa apart. So we're looking at our close neighbors. Let's look at Ghana. Ghana is a very close neighbor to Nigeria. So if Ghana can do it, why can't Nigeria? Ghana is a smaller country comparable to Nigeria. So I think where the issues are again around data. We are not very good with keeping data. When it comes to data, when it comes to documentation, that's one area Nigeria and Nigerians need to improve. That's one area the government agencies, MDAs, parastatals, ministries, departments and agencies, we need to do better. Including myself, we need to do better with keeping data. Okay, I'm on radio right now. How many persons are listening? Am I able to track the number of males, females, from what location, from what? If we have apps, I'm just giving you a typical example. If we have apps that can track all of this data, you have a better understanding of the frequency from what location or axis people are listening. So now that's just an example. So the better we're able to track data, the easier it is for us with documentation. But in this part of the world, because from the inception, we were not necessarily told the importance of data. Nobody has necessarily made it compulsory that we must keep data. It's a big problem for us. So if you don't have the right data, you cannot put out the right information. I tell people all the time, after facts is data. If you're putting out an argument, if you need to shut the arguments very easily, data is what you're supposed to be using, or data is what you'd use. Data is something that, just quenches every argument. And so if you're not able to get your data, your data storage, your data capturing modalities right, it is difficult to be able to document. And if you cannot document, you cannot maximize agua. And
in corroborating your talks on data, yesterday we were having a conversation about a colleague was saying that the 1 billion naira that Funke Akindele's movie clocked at the box office was unrealistic. That there is no way you could make 1 billion naira at the box office in Nigeria. How many theaters do we have that was inflated? We kept going back and forth. On this data issue. So while we're talking, I was saying it's possible, and we're looking at the cinemas we have. We have a larger cluster of cinemas in Southwest. How many do you have in Southeast, South, and other part, North, and in the North and all that? But while we were talking, and it was almost convincing me, I said, well, but I don't believe they would tell such a lie, because then you're exposing yourself to more taxes from government. And while we're there, a colleague just crunched the figures and said, ticket at 5,000 naira, which at times might be more, you only need 200,000 people to reach 1 billion. And that's very achievable, even in the Southwest alone. And that killed the argument.
Controversy.
The controversy. And so data, I agree with you, is very, very key. And one data we'll need to look at is the regional trade. But unfortunately, we need to drag you back to the studio another day, because we're out of time right now. We need to wrap up the show. But we need on a later day to look at data in the regional data, how we're faring, and what we are doing to boost the Nigerian trade, because I know for a fact that the emergent, up until ABC was the first bus company, organized transport system that went from Nigeria to Ghana. Before then, you had all these normal buses, the cars in Mile 2 and all that. Until it came, we didn't really understand the volume of movement between Nigeria and Ghana. But when it came in, and we had 2 buses go every day, then the Young Shall Grow came, OKSIN came in, FX, and the rest came on board. And we had about 7 companies moving every day, and the buses were filled, and yet the small cars were filled every morning, still going, and you had people crossing the borders themselves. Then suddenly realized how much we trade a lot together, and we don't have the volume, so we're unable to weigh and even tax those who trade. So a lot of taxes were missing out, but we need to get you back in the studio.
Thank you very
Wofai Samuel.
Excuse me. Thank you very. It will be a pleasure to come here. I mean, there's so many conversations we need to have around trade. True. And how I'll be more than elated to come here. More than happy to come back. And
when she comes back, I guarantee you listeners will talk a lot more about AGOA, because I know a lot of you are doing so much, and if you can get the right guidance and assistance, you will be able to export your products and make more money for yourself. And like I always say, pay your taxes. Let Nigeria make some money as well. Wofai Samuel, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Kayode. It's been a pleasure hosting me on the event, hosting me on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great.